I'm just going to do the pre-live quickly, if that's all right.
And then Boris.
We're now live, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Alice Gilderdale, and I'm the Chair of West Central Area Committee. I'd like to welcome everyone here this evening. It's Wednesday, the 24th of November at 6:30 p.m. We have received apologies from Councillor Sweeney and Councillor Gay, as he's attending a public consultation event. And we're still waiting for Councillor Nethsinger, but we're expecting her, I think.
Chair, Councillor Nethsinger's just messaged. She's having some problems accessing the Teams link. I don't know if Claire might be kind enough to send it to her again. She's trying to get in at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll resend that for you.
Thank you very much. So the members of the committee are Councillor Bajan, Councillor Bick, Councillor Holloway, Councillor Nethsinger, Councillor Payne, Councillor Porra and Councillor Smith. And we have county councillors with us, hopefully Councillor Nethsinger and Councillor Ray. The officers permanently for this meeting are Head of Environmental Services, Joel Carey, but unfortunately he's not with us this evening, but he sent us a report. And we have the meeting producer, Boris Herzog, and this evening's committee manager is Claire Tunnicliffe. If anyone has any problems hearing me, I'm assuming you can all hear me all right, but please do type in the chat function if you can't hear me or anyone else. Just a reminder that this evening's committee meeting, we cannot make decisions, but we're here to discuss local issues, and the meeting is being broadcast live on the council's website. And by speaking or appearing in this meeting, you're giving consent to being recorded, and the recording will be available via the council's YouTube account. So the process for the agenda will be that the relevant officer will give an introduction to their report. Councillors and members, if the public, will be able to speak and ask any questions. And the committee manager will check the email inbox of Democratic Services in case any public questions have been submitted. If we need a break at any point, let me know, and I'll try and be aware of people's needs, and hopefully, yeah, that'll be all right. But do let me know if you need a break. We have been told that we have a hard deadline of 9 p.m. this evening, as the council's technology is going to go down. So we're going to try and make sure that all agenda items are quite brief, or the updates are quite brief, and then it will give us time for questions as needed. But I'm really hoping that we can be done by 9 p.m. anyway. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the time, and I'm sorry if I cut anyone off, but that's just so that we can get through, because we've got quite a long agenda today. So moving to agenda item 2, could any councillors let me know if they have any declarations of interest? No? Great. Oh, Simon, that's listener.
One of the environmental improvement projects relates to the road that I live in, East Yard Road.
Okay, thank you, that's noted. All right, I'm assuming there are no others. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting of 28th of September are attached to the agenda. Does anyone have any concerns? Please let me know and we can raise them now. No, Seeing any hands? Wonderful. Okay, so agenda item 4. I propose that we don't go through each individual action, but I'm going to ask the committee just to note the updated actions on the committee action sheet. But 2 further updates were published today, so I'm just going to read those out. So one of them was about the multi-agency officer meeting group to discuss e-mopeds and e-scooters. So that's now been confirmed for the 30th of November, which is very soon, so that's really good. And the other thing is on Hobson's Passage, and that the update there is that it's litter picked daily, and the frequency of the surface is being pressure washed. It used to be monthly, but now it's weekly. So, and in between them, the area is inspected on a regular basis, and additional washdowns will be undertaken as and when necessary. So that's also good news. And I check that everyone is happy to note that. Oh, Councillor Porritt.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted to check for the meeting about the e-bikes and e-mopeds. I think various of us had asked if councillors could be involved, because I think it's something that's, well, certainly in our ward, as you know, and elsewhere. So I don't know whether officers are either planning to invite any ward councillors, or if not, whether we could ask for an assurance that we'll get a report back. Because I think that's really important, that we can report back to people on what's happening. And I think the original minute was various councillors asking to be involved. Thanks.
Of course, thank you, Councillor Porritt. We can ask Joel to send that meeting round. I don't know whether, because it's too short notice, councillors might not be available, but if not, hopefully some minutes can be sent round as well. So I can sort that out, hopefully. Okay, are we happy to note that report then? Great. So now moving on to agenda item 5, which is policing in safer neighbourhoods. So I'd like to welcome police representatives. So today we've got Sergeant Stevenson with us, and we've also got Sarah Steggles, our senior antisocial behaviour officer from the council. So yeah, if Sergeant Stevenson, you could introduce yourself and the paper, and then Sarah, if you'd like to come in afterwards, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hi everyone, I'm Sergeant Jim Stevenson. I am the colleague of Sergeant Kevin Missick, who is actually your area sergeant, but Kevin's booked himself a holiday. So in his absence, I'm afraid I'll have to fill in, and you'll have to muddle through with me, I'm afraid. I actually cover the east of the city, so it's not like I'm a long way away. And Kevin and I have been working together as 2 of the neighbourhood sergeants for the city together for the last 6 years, which means you'd like to think I'd be used to his prose by now, but I'm afraid I only got a chance to read his report about 2 hours ago. As you can imagine, Chair, it's been a fairly busy week here at Parkside. So the 4 areas you've asked Sergeant Missick to report on are the antisocial behaviour on the green spaces, especially around Jesus Green, the road safety, which I think we've already touched on already around mopeds and scooters, street begging, and supporting the campaign, well, the new police campaign, which is focusing on frequent drug users and the nighttime economy. Has everyone had a chance to read Kevin's report? Because I'd feel kind of silly reading it just out word for word. So if Sarah wants to introduce herself, and then I'm quite happy to take any questions about any of the activity, and I'll update you as best I can. And if I can't, I will email Kevin the questions. It's only a short break. He'll be back sometime late next week, and he can answer after that, if that's okay.
Sarah, if you want to go ahead, that'd be great.
Yep. Hi everybody. So I'm Sarah Steggles. I'm the Senior Antisocial Behaviour Officer within the Community Safety team, and I work very closely with the police, particularly in relation to the street-based antisocial behaviour. So when we're looking at the rough sleeping and the behaviours associated with some of the rough sleeping. So again, we've put a report together. If there's any questions on that, I'm happy to sort of take them.
So thank you both for the papers. Do we have any questions?
So yes, I have 2 teenage sons, and they report to me that there are gangs on both Grantchester Meadows and on Jesus Green who systemically attempt to rob other teenagers through threats of violence. These characters are well known to the teenagers, and that obviously it is a focal point for drug dealing. So I think it goes a little bit beyond antisocial behaviour. It's become a very threatening environment, and I think at this very sad time, it's worth reflecting on how that can escalate into, well, essentially a murder, loss of life. So I'm concerned about it. I have a number of friends who live in my ward, Castle Ward, whose children have got involved in the drug markets, some from a very young age, and it's caused them a lot of concern and very, very difficult times. It is very, very sad for me because a number of these children, I used to run football teams for them as youngsters at junior school, and now I'm seeing them involved in drugs, and it's a tragedy. And I'm just thinking that how can the combined efforts of public services seek to mitigate this problem?
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'm going to take Councillor Bick and Councillor we've got lots of questions. Okay, Sergeant Stevenson, would you like to respond to that?
I'll try. Yes. So I suppose start with the situation on Jesus Green. Jesus Green effectively, and I think we can probably put this down as to a kind of side effect of the lockdown, where we all got used to socialising in public places and parks, effectively became an extension of the city's nighttime economy, but without the obvious benefits of the city centre's pretty effective CCTV system, the large number of SIA staff that work in and around the city centre, the enhanced lighting that covers those areas. And it did seem to attract a lot of young people to the area, potentially ones that were struggling to get into nighttime economy venues, or for whom those nighttime economy venues were just too expensive to frequent. We have done a lot of work around patrolling Jesus Green, about tackling those particular issues. Obviously, there's the environment fire is working against us. It's obviously very dark on Jesus Green at night, especially if you stray off the public accessible lit footpaths. And we've dealt with that as best we can as part of the nighttime economy issues. I suppose that also comes on to point 4 on Kevin's report about the fact that actually tackling endemic drug dealing in the nighttime economy is now part of the Operation Connect work that we do around nighttime economy. To take a kind of much bigger step back from those individual locations, Councillor, one of the portfolios I own for the city is I'm the sort of Safer Schools lead. I spend a lot of time going into secondary schools in Cambridge City, talking about the dangers of becoming involved in county lines groups, trying to educate and inform young people about how they can spot if they or their friends are being criminally exploited, or the kind of situations that might get them into positions where they will be criminally exploited, or at least try to. I was hoping at that point Sarah might offer to talk a little bit about the Cans Against County Lines project, because she had more to do with it than I did. But I think for a lot of us, especially those of us who are parents of school-aged children in the city, and I'm included in that slightly larger demographic than just a police officer in the city, we all want to keep our children safe. and we all need to accept that the responsibility for educating our children doesn't just lie with schools, and that actually they need life skills that it's difficult, don't come underneath core school curriculum. And that's why we do a lot of the schools outreach stuff we do. It's why I go into youth groups and talk to them. It's why we start with people, as young as year 6, which frightens me every day, I'll be honest. And we have to accept the fact that the criminal gangs that are seeking to make vast amounts of money out of this activity, there's nothing about their activity other than that which will make them the most money. And if they think that their criminal activity becomes harder to deal with if it involves recruiting children into it, trust me, they will do that without hesitation. So if you have concerns about a young person, you need to discuss that with the young person. If you're, a trusted adult to them, you need to talk to the school's designated safeguarding lead about it. You need to talk to the local police about it. Most of our activity around young people starts off with educate, inform, and divert. And I think this is a whole society issue. The CAMS Against County Lines project is a great example, which most of it ran, the actual project itself ran during the pandemic, where the City Council, Children and Young People Services and the police work together to produce an education package which we can take into schools and deliver to them, take to youth groups and deliver to them. It can't just be about high visibility patrolling. There just aren't enough of us. Sarah? Sarah, you've left yourself on mute.
Yeah, so I didn't actually have a lot of involvement in the CAMS Against County Lines, but my colleagues did. And as Jim said, it was a sort of a educational package that went into schools around sort of county lines and educating young people about the dangers. But we also we've recently set up a multi-agency forum where we're talking about young people who may be getting into sort of exploitative activities. The peer group and places meeting focuses on young people, but also the places, and it's looking at safeguarding, contextual safeguarding. And the meeting is attended by schools, police, social services, ourselves, lots of different agencies who may know names and have information they can feed into that meeting. And then we look at particular areas or young people and what we can do to sort of safeguard them. So if we are getting areas that are becoming hotspots, we're looking at those through that meeting and identifying young people who may need to be discussed for extra safeguarding through that meeting as well. So that's ongoing on a monthly basis.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Sergeant Stevenson. We have another question from Councillor Bick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was a different aspect of the report. I wanted to refer to the area of the focus on mopeds and scooters that was asked for last time. I think that I'd like to be really specific about this. What I believe that we have all established through questioning in the past is that the small wheel scooters, electric scooters, constitute an illegal class of vehicle, except for the orange Voi scooters, which are operating under a special dispensation through the government and the combined authority. And there are discussions and controls that are agreed from time to time in relation to Voi. But in reality, there is a good 50% of the scooters one comes across on the streets and open spaces, which aren't Voi scooters. They aren't the orange scooters. They're other ones. They are therefore illegal. And I do think that the police needs to be taking some action about them. It's quite a clear proposition. Some of them are orange and they're Voi. Some of them aren't, and they're illegal. And it doesn't seem to me that there's really any intervention that's being taken about the use of those vehicles. And maybe at some point in the future, the government legislate for some sort of regime that enables them to be more broadly used, but at the moment they haven't, and it's not for us to second guess, and we're still following a controlled experiment with VOI and the combined authority. So can we please see you actually making some interventions on people riding the ones that are illegal?
Thank you, Councillor Bick. Sergeant Stevenson, would you be to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously this is not just a Cambridge problem, councillors. It's not even just a Cambridgeshire problem. This is a national problem. A few months back when I was working in Peterborough on a short-term basis, I canvassed all the other neighbourhood inspectors about what they were doing about the unlawful use of scooters on the roads, which is clearly a large problem, given that literally any one of us could walk into a retailer in Cambridge and buy one of these devices without anyone making any attempt to inform us that the vehicle we're buying is unsuitable for use on a public road. So there's my kind of first, I suppose, challenge back, is there has to be some kind of national public awareness campaign where we point out that actually these vehicles are not suitable except for use on private land. And until retailers take some responsibility for informing people that they're buying a device that they then shouldn't ride away from the store, I'm going to be fighting a continual uphill stream of vehicles that are replacing the ones that I seize. Just because simply there is only so many hours in the day, the approach we've taken with this is we generally, if the vehicle is being used in a blatantly antisocial manner or in a way that is particularly reckless, we will intervene and we will prosecute these people for riding without a license, riding without insurance, riding an unregistered vehicle. But as part of the whole campaign, and I think, again, this is a national initiative to get people out of their cars, to minimise their use of the road, we have to accept that people are going to very quickly adopt alternative forms of transport when they think that they're now okay to use. And the government national schemes have done that. We now have vast swathes of people who think it's perfectly fine to use an electric scooter on the road, whether it's a VOI one or not. And these are people who probably actually have never had any encounter with the police. And for us to start arbitrarily seizing their personal property, I'm uncomfortable with the level of infringement on their personal property rights that represents, especially if they're using it in a legitimate way, not a legitimate way, a responsible way that conforms to, say, somebody riding an electrically assisted pedal cycle. I suspect that's probably why we're now going to have this multi-agency meeting on the 30th of November to discuss a strategy to either, take this on and inform the public ourselves, which again is simply us filling a gap left by the Department of Transport, and come up with some effective local strategy to deal with what is actually a national picture. The only saving grace I can add to that, Councillor, is I talked to a couple of colleagues of mine in traffic tonight, and they are expecting, because they have their ear to the ground on these things more than I do, apparently some imminent guidance to be issued by the Department of Transport through the National Police Chiefs Council to forces on how to tackle this issue. I'll leave it up to you, members of local government, to tell me what imminent means in national government terms.
Great, thank you.
If I could just respond, Chair.
Yeah, sure.
I'm obviously not terribly happy by that. I follow the argument, but it just doesn't send out a very good message to people that, that there are so many allowances made for something that is clearly not legal. And if you found a car without a number plate but being driven responsibly, I think you would probably take action. But I just don't quite see, if you're taking the attitude you are, where the action is going to come from, because is it trading standards need to take some action, or what? And to say that it's just a national problem, that's quite frustrating for people, because we're talking about our area.
I completely get that, Councillor. I mean, obviously, we have to take action on all sorts of national problems. Clearly, the ones at the minute that are foremost on my mind are exploitative criminal activity around drugs, which usually ends up involving knives. There are lots and lots of, we do lots and lots of days of action around road safety in Cambridge, and these electric scooters are not exempt from that activity. But I have to confine myself to the limited objectives I can achieve around that. And the obvious ones is actually, first of all, let's start dealing with the people who are misusing the road anyway. You're right, people do drive around with no number plate, and if I catch them, they will get a traffic offence report. But I don't go hunting for them. I have other things I need to focus my time on. And that's not just particularly pertinent right now. That's true a lot anyway. The way I got to speak to two guys from road policing is because they're actually in the city tonight carrying out activity. They'd come here for a break. So, we do discuss this with road policing. You're right, Councillor. How do we tackle the retailers and the online retailers? Is that a trading standards question? Hopefully some answers on the 30th. Because I'd like to know who's going to be the lead agency for dealing with that too.
Thank you anyway. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Porritt, you've got a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I certainly welcome the fact police have been liaising with delivery companies. I think that was something several of us have raised last time, and particularly thank Sarah and colleagues and the police for the action they've been taking around Cobble Yard, where we've had some persistent issues with antisocial behaviour. I suppose for me, the street begging is really quite visible at the moment. Noticeably so when you walk through various areas of the city centre. So obviously, in terms of priorities, I welcome that being one that we keep as a priority, particularly, obviously in the winter when it's cold, so that we can get people's support. Although I'm aware that often the street begging isn't necessarily related to people who are homeless, of course. I suppose the other thing on the e-bikes and e-scooters, it's wonderful if we can get some guidance on that, because as you say, at the moment there's a bit of a void apart from the Voice scooters, because I've been into some of the local shops to say, why are you selling these? And they'd have a very tiny notice that says, by the way, they're not road legal. But, people do use them. So I just wondered as well, one of the issues at the moment, particularly across various commons and shared spaces, is at night, I am seeing quite a few e-bikes and e-scooters, particularly delivering things with no lights, which worries me for their safety, but also for the safety of, residents using those shared spaces. So again, if we're looking at priorities, I wonder if that might be something the police could have a particular eye out for, because, the speed and the silence of these vehicles, particularly with no lights, it's a bit of a recipe for disaster, and both for the people being asked to drive them around to fulfill their minimum wage things, where we know they're on a tight time scale. I understand that, but equally for their safety and for the safety of people using the shared paths. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for your question and comments. Sarah or Sergeant Stevenson, would you like to come back on those? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Just to say that the street begging and the issues around the sort of the homeless individuals in the city, that's sort of an ongoing piece of work, I think, for myself and the police. It's something we're constantly talking about, and looking at particular individuals and deciding what actions to take with them. So it is ongoing. The problem is you sort of deal with one and another one quickly takes their place. So it's just something we're continuing to sort of work on.
Chair, if you'd like me to add to that as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I fully accept the councillor's concern about the use of, well, any of these suitable vehicles on cycle paths, especially at night. We used to run this thing for bicycles called the LID scheme, where we would encourage people with the sort of promise of a rescindable ticket if they went and got some lights for their bicycle. In fact, I once spent a very wet and windy November evening on Christ pieces with the chief constable and 12 of my police cadets trying to fit temporary light kits to people's bikes. I suppose I could do that again. It wasn't the most fun evening I've had with that group of young people, I'll be honest. The persistent begging, Kevin has had a long-running policing operation targeting persistent street begging. We have lots and lots of information on the walls around the office, which makes everyone in the station aware of who the long-term offenders are, whether or not they've got criminal behaviour orders, the use of community protection warnings, community protection notices, a whole, I suppose, to boil it back down to something basic, carrot and stick approach, where we offer them the vast array of services the city has available for people who are genuinely needy in one hand, and the alternative for criminal prosecution for their persistent criminal behaviour in the other hand. Cambridge is a very affluent city. Lots of people here have lots of money. Lots of people here seem to be burdened with an abundance of middle-class guilt, and don't want to take advantage of the street aid posters that Sarah's team put up all around the city, which I think are fantastic. Yes, we do target the persistent offenders as best we can. I don't control sentencing at court. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Porritt, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
And no, thank you. Just to say thank you very much for the work that is being done. I say it just in terms of, I know we have to put a list of priorities at the end of this meeting, so I would quite like, in effect, the lights and people cycling in the dark and the street begging to continue to be priorities, just to make that clear. But thank you, because I know the work you've been doing has been really helpful. Thank you.
That's fine, Chair. And even if you folks see fit not to make these things a priorities, Kevin's going to keep doing the street outreach work he does anyway, regardless. You do cut him a little bit of slack with the superintendent about the amount of time he's allowed to devote to it if you make it a priority. And the road safety stuff we do will carry on regardless, especially now that the weather and the daylight has turned. I suppose that comes with some benefits in that not many people are going to be sitting around on Jesus Green in the thunderstorm we've just had. So, you know, some of the seasonal activity steps up at this time of year, some of it we can stand out.
Thank you. I was actually, sorry, just to jump in here. I was in a meeting with Joel this morning, Joel Carey, and he mentioned that we do have a new member of the team who is specifically going to be working with the street community in Cambridge. So I think that's a really positive outcome. I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to.
Yeah, so we have a street support officer that started in our team. They only started on Monday, so it's early days, and we're just sort of bedding them in at the moment to all the sort of various policies and procedures that we have to follow. But their role will be to do a bit more assertive outreach with those on the street, but also, excuse me, build relationships with individuals, gather evidence where we need evidence, work closely with the police and the other agencies, looking at what we can do to deter some of the behaviours. In addition to what's already happening with the sort of the police and what we're doing with sort of injunctions and things like that. So it's just another person that will have a very sort of visible presence on the street.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, and we've got one more question from Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chair. My question's along similar lines to Councillor Smith's, and thanks, Sergeant Stevenson, for your really comprehensive answer on that question. I just wanted to try and clarify what the new campaign on drugs is and how that differs from what's being done at the moment. I didn't quite understand which bits were new and which bits you'd already been doing. Thanks.
Yeah, that's fine, Councillor, and this is the bit where I wish he'd discussed this with me in more detail before he left. But this particular focus, as far as I understand it, is around upskilling the other workers in the nighttime economy, because that's what Kevin's particular focus is on, around sort of suitable interventions if you've got people in your venue you think might be using drugs, as opposed to you've got people in your venue who you think might be dealing drugs. And it's actually the first line I think there is about informing license holders and designated premises supervisors and SIA security officers when they have those incidents, what they can kind of tackle with themselves and report to us after the fact, and what they need to be highlighting to us right now, and we'll come and try and deal with it as part of our nighttime economy work on a busy Friday and Saturday night. And then what they can do as well as license holders and venue managers, how they can, legitimately then, for instance, if they confiscate drugs that they find illegal drugs that they're, say, in one of their venue toilets, actually, you don't need a police officer to come down and take that off you tonight. You can possess it lawfully, because the reason for you possessing it is that you're going to hand it to the police in the morning so we can dispose it. So that kind of aspect to it as well. This will be on top of all the proactive activity that's done by the neighbourhood support teams around organised crime, county lines, and that's the proactive activity, the diversionary activity, and the educational activity, which is scattered across the various neighbourhood teams that work across the city. So we're not stopping anything to do to that. I suppose that's Kevin recruiting more people to help effectively.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
You'll have to tell me, Sarah, if that was not what he was talking about, because I have to admit I was doing something else while he was discussing it.
I think it probably was.
Great. Okay, I can't see any more questions, and we haven't had any through to the Democratic Services email. So thank you very much, both of you, for attending, for your papers. Is everyone happy for us to continue with those priorities for the next update? Does anyone, I know that Councillor Porrer clarified that these are kind of the areas that we'd still like to get updates on, but if anyone else has any other areas they'd like to cover in the next update at West Central, then let us know.
Chair, I don't know if you want to shift the focus for the antisocial behaviour on green spaces. I appreciate a lot of time that strays into criminal activity as well. I suppose crime in itself is a form of antisocial behaviour, just a more extreme one. So obviously, from the scanning I've done before the meeting, I didn't think Jesus Green in particular at the moment is a problem. There might be other bits that you'd rather Kevin focuses his attention on now, certainly with the change in the weather.
Councillor Smith. You're on mute.
I'd like to thank Sergeant Stevenson for bringing perspective to what's really important in policing in the area, and that is this drug-related antisocial behaviour and criminal activity and the threats that it makes, the risks it puts our young children to. I mean, that to me is by far and away the most important issue confronting us, because obviously I know that there was the murder in the Market Square where 2 people have recently been imprisoned. This is the source of violence of an extreme nature. So I think that needs to be our #1 priority here, wherever it's occurring. I think the other point I'd want to make as well is that I haven't heard about action to deter the demand side. That there are a lot of people in this city who are recreational users of Class A drugs. Middle class people, well-off people, and their recreation is actually creating havoc and ruining lives in this city. And I think they should start getting a conscience about that. And I'm not seeing anything that's happening to make them aware of the implications. I mean, for God knows, they should know of what their activity for a bit of fun and then pleasure and enjoyment is actually resulting in. Not just here in this city, but worldwide, globally.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you. Yeah, my point was just to say I'd like to hear a bit more about the youth work and diversion that you do. It was interesting to hear you mention that, Sergeant Stevenson. I'd be really interested to hear more about that because that obviously also very much fits in with giving people alternative outlets that don't then lead them into hopefully getting involved with drugs. So if that could be included in the report, perhaps under the drugs heading or as a separate item, whichever you think's best.
Can I reply to that, Chair? Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. We could talk about that all night, Councillor, because I do a lot. Yes, if you want to put that on, I'm sure Kevin will ask me to fill that bit of his report in for him, but we do a lot of outreach into schools, a lot of programs targeting young people. Targeting sounds like is the wrong word. Focusing on young people who, especially schools identified to as might be vulnerable. We do it in conjunction with the Children and Young People's Partnership. We do it in conjunction with Sarah's team. It goes on all the time in the background. I suppose we probably ought to shout about it a bit more.
Okay, great. So that sounds like we have some direction for next report. But I think Councillor Porrow also said that it would be good to still get an update on street life in Cambridge, and maybe hopefully by then we'll have an update on the e-scooters as well. So that seems like a good kind of three general areas to talk about. Okay, well, if we've come to the end of that agenda point, thank you, Sergeant Stevenson and Sarah, for your time. You're welcome to leave unless you'd like to stay for the rest of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a to-do list as long as my arm, Councillor, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your evening.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you very much. And it was lovely to see you all again. I know I don't see you very often.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, so now we're going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the Greater Cambridge Partnership Making Connections consultation. So the officer we have present is Peter Blake this evening. Hi, welcome to West Central. If you'd like to introduce yourself and present the paper, and then we can take questions afterwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening. I've actually got a slide deck I'm going to go through. I'm conscious of your time constraints, so I'll canter through it. But I did just want to bring a little bit of context to this, and then a bit of richness in terms of the proposals. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, thank you. We can see the presenter's notes as well. It's not.
Yeah, no, don't. I'm just trying to get it onto the slideshow. Okay, so firstly, thank you for having me. We're in the process. Let me get this right. Here we go. Okay, so we are in week 6 of a consultation on making connections, which is really about how we manage the transportation issues associated with our city and our city region. The challenges the committee will know and understand. You know, you're experiencing on a daily basis the challenges of growth, greater population in the recent census perhaps than was expected, planned growth of new homes and new jobs, and the impact that has both from a traffic and transportation perspective, but also then in terms of our lives, our communities, and on our city environment. So greater traffic levels leading to further congestion, concerns of the contribution that makes to poor air pollution and the associated deaths, 120 deaths per annum in the Greater Cambridge area associated with air pollution, and then clearly, of course, the contribution that transport makes to local carbon and carbon emissions. So again, things that have been around and we're well versed in. In terms of the Greater Cambridge partnership between the local authorities in our area, business, education, and with the government, and we are looking to build some stuff. So to build and invest in sustainable measures, new busways, more park and ride and travel hub capacity, greenways, cycleways across the city. Many of you will be aware of the Histon Road and indeed the Milton Road projects that are ongoing at the moment. But we're left with how do we manage that city environment, and how do we manage the sort of the travails that greater traffic and ever greater traffic is going to relay. So this conversation that we've been having now for 4 or 5 years, 3 formal consultations. We've had a citizens assembly that's really sort of challenged ourselves as to what do we need to do in our environment. And I think certainly in terms of the last consultation we had in 2021, strong support for the aims of reducing carbon, of tackling pollution and congestion, strong support for a much improved bus network, more cycling and walking, and managing a reduction in car use. So what's the current consultation about? 3 key elements, which I'll talk through in a little bit of detail. We need to transform the bus network. I'm an officer who regularly attends these things in a navy suit, and transform the bus network sort of trips off the tongue. But I really do mean we need to rip it up and start again. It needs to be fit for purpose and fit for our growing and economically successful environment, ensuring everybody can benefit from that success. We are a cycling city, but actually we need to up our game in terms of sustainable travel initiatives and investment, better infrastructure for cyclists, pedestrians, and better public space in our city environment. And the way by which we do that is to manage traffic down through a sustainable travel zone, which is a charging zone across the city, with the money ring fenced for improvements in public transport, walking and cycling. The bus network, I can bore you with detail, but it's a much wider geography than just our city. It's the travel to work area, because so many people come in to work and to enjoy our environment. In the city context, we're looking at 8 buses an hour on many of the key routes. We need a £1 fare anywhere across the city. We need electric vehicles rather than diesel vehicles, more orbital routes, less services that chug eventually into the city centre, more direct services to the biomedical campus, the West Cambridge site, the science park and the like, and much longer operating hours. So as part of our proposals, we're suggesting 5 in the morning till 1 in the morning, 7 days a week, to ensure that we're really catering for different work patterns, but also the evening leisure and nighttime economy. So an awful lot of detail about proposals to transform the bus network in our wider area. More information on what we need to do around cycling, walking. As I've said, we need far more segregated cycle solutions. We're in the process of constructing segregated cycle greenways from our villages in South Cambridge to the edge of the city, but at the moment we don't have the space to get segregated routes through the city. That feels wrong. So we need to find a way of creating more space for cyclists and for people, and the whole end-to-end more secure cycle parking, improving public space, exploring car clubs and electric vehicles is going to be a key component of this going forward. And then finally, and this tends to be the bit that in terms of social media and wider media captures the sort of the wider interest, the sustainable travel zone, which is the proposal, and again this is all proposals, a charging zone across the wider city environment, weekdays 7 till 7, where vehicles are charged. Any vehicle on the network is charged £5 or for private vehicles, with that money ring fenced and reinvested in that public transport, walking and cycling improvements. And I think critical to all this is we're suggesting a start date of the charging zone of 27 or 28, so 5 or 6 years away from where we are now, maybe looking to phase in earlier, maybe for peak times or types of vehicles, but very much want to hear people's views on what that looks like. As I've said, £5 a day for cars, perhaps more for vans and lorries and coaches. And again, all of that information is contained in the consultation, and we welcome people's views. And then an extensive range of discounts, exemptions and reimbursements, many built on the experience of other cities that have done this, London, Birmingham, Bath, but also a number of that reflect the circumstances in Cambridge and Greater Cambridge. So suggestions that people on lower incomes, perhaps linked to council tax rebates, get reductions, 100% discounts for blue badge holders, and then working with NHS, social care and charity providers to make sure that we get exemptions and reimbursement schemes in place so they are not unduly impacted. this is the slide that sort of says, well, what might this be like if we did this? So, and it's delivering all parts of it. So it's delivering on the public transport vision and improvements. It's delivering on the sustainable and active travel measures, and delivering on a charging zone. Is that we would reduce car trips within the zone by 50%. That would significantly improve the operation and delivery of public transport measures, which we're expecting that there'll be a 40% increase in patronage within the city, 30% across that wider travel to work map, 60,000 more cycle or walking journeys on a daily basis. And again, an investment, a revenue investment pool that the local area could decide what it spends on year in, year out. So those public transport improvements, those active transport measures can be safeguarded for the medium term. Every time our civic leaders have discussed this, they've made clear to me and the team that the public transport improvements need to be brought in first. So what this is an indicative timeline that says we're currently consulting until 23rd of December. We and county council colleagues might be in a position to make recommendations, say in the middle of next year, so the middle of 2023. And that would mean that from the end of next year, we would be in a position to start the improvements in public transport. That most likely would start with lower fares under the current proposals, because that's the easiest thing to deliver. And then over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, there would be a ramping up in terms of new bus services, new vehicles, recruit and retain drivers, all the things that we would expect to see from a modern, effective public transport network that would be delivered in advance of the charge in 27, 28. Thank you for allowing me to go through that, Chair. That my final slide, all the details are on the website. I'll take the slides down now and then happily try and answer any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you very much. That was a whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure people will have questions. Do any councillors? Oh, we've got a question. Okay, while I find the question in the chat, Councillor Holloway, would you like to go first?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much, Peter, for that. So I've got a few questions. One, do you know, are you able to share how many responses you've had so far to the consultation? Do you have a rough idea of whether you're managing to reach lots of people, and then also plans for how to reach those people who haven't yet responded in the remaining weeks? Second, I've got quite a few questions, if that's okay. So one about charging at weekends. So to me, I mean, I understand that obviously the busiest times are during the week, and that's when you want to reduce congestion, but there is also quite a bit of congestion at the weekends. It seems like an opportunity to reduce that without penalising people who are living in the city or near the city, potentially, because quite a lot of people at weekends are coming in from further afield. So I would quite like to see a charge at weekends with a potential reduction in the charge on weekdays, with it still being there as a disincentive to drive, but perhaps lower so that it's more affordable for people. So can you just talk a bit about that and the decision making around that? Would all the new buses be electric, and would current diesel ones be replaced as electric buses? Can you talk a bit about car clubs, subsidised or free bikes, e-bikes, cargo bikes that you might be providing? And final question, what about having a short period, say of a month, of free bus travel, or something like £10 for the month for bus travel as an extra incentive to get people onto buses, in a similar way that Germany had their €9 a month train scheme? Thanks. Sorry, it's lots of questions.
Peter, would you like to take that group of questions, then I'll take another few.
Thank you, Chair. So the last time I asked the question, we'd had 11,000 responses. and I think that was about a few days ago, so maybe halfway through the period. I don't think we could be accused of hiding our light under a bushel on this. I mean, we are out there in terms of presentations, meeting individuals. An awful lot of information's gone out in the public domain through sort of conventional media, social media, and I mean, certainly if the letters pages of the local papers or anything to go by, there's a lot of chatter and discussion going on about this, and we are just absolutely encouraging people to respond and give us their views, and it picks up on some of the questions you sort of subsequently ask. When to charge. Weekdays 7 till 7, weekend, you know, we're specifically asking a whole series of questions, and one of them is, you know, what times, and we want people's views on that. We are focusing on trying to tackling the congestion problem, but there's a balance that we need to draw here. So particularly for people living in the city who may want to use their car for large shops or move large items, then I think we've got to try and draw a balance in terms of them being able to move around without a charge applying. But again, we've put that out for consultation, and we absolutely want to hear people's views. There would be a programme of diesel buses being phased out and electric vehicles being phased in. That's a key component of this, and it delivers significant air quality benefits. We get some benefits from reduced the mileage, but also we want cleaner, particularly larger vehicles as well. And I think in terms of your car clubs, you know, cargo bikes, and also your free bus travel, you know, at the moment we're talking about a big strategic decision. Is this area, you know, are we up for reimagining what our city environment could look like? There will then be a whole series of sort of detailed issues that we need to think about. You know, how do we develop an account-based system that encourages people, you know, sort of seamless transactions through which we could then target a free bus travel day or a free charge day. So that I think there's an awful lot more detail that would be required if decision makers based on this consultation decide on the next steps. And so I think there'll be a lot more to see if we get to that point. At the moment, we've just clearly got to manage how much information we can realistically put out. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry, Cameron.
So I was just going to say yes, thank you very much. And I understand the tension between some people wanting a lot more detail on particular aspects of the proposal and other people not wanting it to be seen as a fait accompli and being presented as a finished solution. So I do understand that's a difficult tightrope to walk. And thank you very much. Overall, I'm very supportive of the principles. So thanks a lot for those answers.
Thank you. So we've got a question from the public. I'm going to read it out, but it's also in the chat. Of the revenue expected to be received for the sustainable travel zone, how much in percentage terms would be specifically and only for walking and cycling?
That would be a decision for the charging authority, and the ultimate decision would rely with the county council. And I think what we're making clear in the proposals is almost the size of that pie. 50 to 60 million pounds a year could be generated under these proposals. What we're also saying, though, as part of a package, improvements in public transport, walking and cycling are necessary. But obviously, quite the final sort of apportionments, that will be subject to final decision makers.
Great, thank you. Hopefully, if the person who wrote in with that question wants to ask a follow-up, there's going to be enough time. So Councillor Payne, come to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Peter. I just wanted to ask two questions, which are, I feel, things which sort of residents are raising a lot with quite a bit of concern, just to sort of see what the kind of best response is. And I'm sort of very keen to keep encouraging people who might have decided they're against the scheme to still respond to the consultation, as I'm concerned that like the petitions and the march on Sunday will then mean we have an even worse situation if those people kind of think they've then given their view and don't respond, so we don't hear actually the bits of the scheme that perhaps they might like around the buses. So I'm really conscious that they do engage with the process fully, even if they don't like the idea of the charge. One thing, so I was wondering, could you sort of explain a little bit around in terms of what could be changed and tweaked? To what extent is there scope for adaptation within the proposals? As I've had many people talking about the the page in the brochure around how some options have been discounted. So people raising questions of, well, what are the options that are still on the table to adapt this? Also, I don't know if other people have heard this. One resident wrote to me to say that he'd heard that people, well, who's being actively encouraged to submit several responses to give a negative view, which I found appalling. And I just wondered, is there any way for you to sort of triage that to make sure that the system hasn't been abused? Because that would, of course, not be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to take another couple of questions, if that's all right, Peter. So we've got Lucy.
Hi, Peter. We've discussed this a fair bit, so it's good to see you. Just when you're picking up some of the other questions about responses to the consultation, I think that one of the important things is to understand who is responding. And my understanding is that actually the numbers of responses from younger people are lower than you might expect. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit and talk about what you are doing and what we might do to try and improve that. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Councillor Nessinger. And Councillor Bick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I am one of the City Council's representatives on the GCP's Assembly, which has discussed this a lot, and I am of the view that these proposals have been arrived at with a lot of evidence and a lot of logic, and I'm now in listening mode, really, to understand what the fit is with people's own domestic and work arrangements, and the fit with what they are prepared to do to address some objectives which I think people in Cambridge have been regarding as high priorities for a long period of time: congestion, the carbon footprint of transport and pollution, the safety of the many people who already use active transport, and the environment that in some places is really brutalized by the extent of traffic. Now, whether these do fit, I'm listening, but there is one question that I want to sort of bowl at you, Peter, because we're talking here about a very specific geographical area in the centre of the city, and one of the implications of the proposals is that there will be a lot more buses, and I absolutely understand and support the fact that there will be buses that go point to point, not necessarily into the city centre, forcing people to change buses. But I think it's likely that there will be still an increase in the number of buses coming to the city centre out of this. And I think that the question that a lot of people in the city centre are very keen to understand is, how will the volume of buses be managed in this very small compressed area? Are we likely to see arrangements for buses to stop on the outer side of the city centre, maybe with the return of the really very popular minibus that used to circulate within and through the city, could take people from there if they didn't want to walk, and just what are your ideas and how are they going to be fleshed out?
Great, thank you, Peter. If you'd like to tackle that selection of questions, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best. So in terms of Councillor Payne's questions, I mean, firstly, to absolutely agree about encouraging people to respond. Whether you like, dislike some part or all, we are deliberately asking a series of questions that sort of gets under gets into the detail around days, hours, boundary, public transport. We've put out 44 maps on public transport route. We want to hear people's views on that, and that's really important, because that's what decision makers, that's what the local civic leaders are going to be listening to, are going to be analysing when they take those final decisions. What could be changed or tweaked? Well, that's probably a little bit above my pay grade. I mean, they are decisions that will go to the executive board and ultimately to the county council. But I think what the board and the county council will want to see is, well, what did people say regarding the size of the boundary, the hours of operation? What did they say around the particular bus routes? Do people think we've got it right? Do they think that it needs to be tweaked or changed? So I think the process here is we've put out an awful lot of information. We're asking some quite, a number of open questions. So don't just say yes, no, tell us what you think or what could be changed. And I think what will be really important of this, that information is then collated, analysed and presented to decision makers who will then decide on what the next steps would be. We are cross-checking responses, as you would expect, in a variety of ways regarding several responses or otherwise, and we'll continue to do that through the process. In terms of Councillor Netzinger's sort of question, this is a really important one, and it's a week or so ago the last time I looked, but we were looking 16 to 24-year-olds were 3 to 4% of the respondees, and that leaves a real gap in terms of the richness of response and the views that we're just not hearing. So kindly working with county council colleagues, with colleagues from the universities, sixth forms, schools. We were out at conversations with schools earlier today. We've a series of conversations that have happened over the previous weeks and will continue right to the end of this to say, how can we bring it to people's attention? How can we get a level of interest and engagement? And we've got people out with iPads saying, look, at various locations to say you can sort of tick the box here and you can go through the sort of questionnaire now. But I think it's really important that we hear from that group, because they probably have quite different travel constraints, habits and everything else than other groups, and their use of public transport and their experiences of cycling and walking are markedly different from others. So I think that work really needs to continue. In term, Councillor Bick's point again, I think is a really important part of the detail that we'll need to focus on if these proposals go forward. So, currently the bus offer, it does a number of things that doesn't serve our sort of communities for reasons in terms of the way it's delivered at the moment. One of the things is the double decker, is one size fits all. I mean, commercially, it's the cheapest way of delivering it. They get standardization. But that doesn't deliver on the public need of our city. We need different types of vehicles. As I've said, we absolutely need those electric vehicles coming in. We're going to need smaller vehicles. I think reintroducing the idea of those minibus circulars, I think, will be an important interplay in this. The idea is we would have generally less buses going into that city centre cordon because we have more orbital and more direct buses to the biomedical campus and the West Cambridge site anyway. At the moment, everything gets sucked through whether you like it or not, because it's the cheapest way of providing services. But you're right, we will still have buses there, and we need to get that offer right. So more electric buses, more mixed sizes of buses, and very different route network. But I think that will continue to require refining, refreshing, listening to you as representatives, listening to local communities to say, have we got that offer right? But we'll have far more flexibility than we have at the moment with the sort of more one-size-fits-all provision of bus services. Hopefully that sort of brings a little bit of light to some of the questions, Chair.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And we have another question from Councillor Porrer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think at the moment my most concern is there seems to be quite a lot of misinformation. I've had people tell me that it's starting immediately, that there's no exemptions, park and rides being charged for as well. So that the money's not ring fenced, it's going to disappear into some pot and not pay for buses. So I think, I just stress the importance of saying to all residents and people who've talked to me about it, read all the documents, because as you say, it's not going to be helpful just to have yes or no's. It's going to be much more helpful to say, well, this works for me, or this part works for me, but this is what worries me. So I'm sure we're all doing our best to encourage all residents to put their views in, but I think the more we can do to encourage people to read it, because I think understandably people are just worried about it. But it is quite a long lead time. I had someone say it's a stealth thing. I thought it's not. We're not being very stealthy about it. We're being fairly open. And I think as Councillor Bick says, we're all listening. So the more residents who can put their views in and give constructive suggestions as to how it might work would be really brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porritt. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think there is a lot of misinformation going around, and something that was Peter and I were with businesses this morning discussing the same thing, and someone mentioned, I don't know if you were there when we were talking about this, but someone mentioned that there are big signs been put up around the city saying this is where you'll be charged £5, this is £5 as you enter this zone. And actually a lot of businesses were saying they're quite concerned that people coming into the city right now might be thinking, oh my goodness, what do I need to be doing? Do I need to be paying? And it is creating a bit of panic rather than actually creating clarity. So I don't know whether you have any idea on whether there's something that you can do to help kind of change that narrative. I don't know.
We are doing all we can. We're stepping up to every media. I think with the chair of our board, we had an hour on Radio Cambridge Q&A, and we're going to do another one in a couple of weeks. So we're not missing a media opportunity. You know, this is not a simple soundbite of do you like a congestion charge or you're not. It's more complex than that, because the challenge is more complex. You know, we've got a carbon challenge, we've got an air quality challenge, and we've got a congestion challenge, and it is going to get markedly worse. And so what we need to do is the package of measures, and we've put out a lot of detail about a package that's taken us 3 or 4 years to get there. But now we're asking a lot of questions of the public and of communities and of our civic leaders to say, well, tell us what you think, but give us the reasons, give us your thought process. If you've got a concern, explain the concern, because it may be that can be incorporated and that can be dealt with. And it's important that people partake, say, regardless of what they think, because what we'll be doing is pulling all of that information together, analysing it, and then presenting it back to the decision makers to say, this is what people said. These were their concerns. These are the bits that they supported, and this might be the way forward in terms of the next steps for this.
Thank you so much. We have no more questions online, and it doesn't seem like anyone's got any further questions in the room. So yeah, I'd just like to extend our thanks. I'm really impressed by your thoughtful responses and clarity with this. It's been really great to hear from you, and I hope that even if we haven't had many residents in the room tonight, we can kind of share this with our contacts and networks in Market and beyond in the West Central wards. So yeah, thank you very much, Peter. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Good night now.
Thank you. Have a good evening. All right, so we're now going to move on to agenda item 7, which is open forum, and I believe we're joined by Lillian Rundblad, who would like to ask a question on behalf of Histon Road Area Residents Association. Welcome, Lillian. Would you like to answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. My question is regarding the new residents in Darwin Green. So on November the 10th, I went to the North and West Community Forum and presented the problems we see it. The residents that have bought their homes and live in the area has no services whatsoever. What was brought forward in the prospects is community rooms, library, health clinic, superstore, park, enlarged points, and a center, as well as public transport. Nothing has been done to service them. So there is one point where the Windsor Road then connects to Darwin Green. It has already had proposals and designs for walking and cycling only. No cars. And this has received the planning permission. However, the companies, the Barts and David Wilson are planning a different area to start implementing its walking and cycling route. And if they could get through here, they would have about 5 to 10 minutes, and they would be up with Aldi and stores and post offices and all kinds of services. The A-bus going to Addenbrooks, and we want them to open this this route immediately. So HRI is therefore requesting that the West Central Area Board consider this proposal and take steps to implement it through discussions with the developers.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
you can always raise questions. I try to shorten it down a bit for you.
Thank you for your question. I'm going to just put you back on mute so that we don't have feedback. Councillor Payne and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Lillian, for coming to ask this question and for everything you do. It's a huge amount for the Histon Road Area Residents Association. I just wanted to say that I absolutely 100% support this, and it works both ways. So both for residents from Histon Road Area and Windsor Roads who would like to be able to travel through Darwin Green to get to Girton, to get to the Eddington Sainsbury's and Dolcedos. There is a sort of new community very much forming over in Eddington, and it'd be great for residents to have a way to walk or cycle through there, which avoids going around Huntingdon roads, and so it's a much safer routes. And also going the other way for residents from Darwin Green, who, if they want to come around to the shops on Histon Road, as Lillian says, to get to Aldi or Iceland, it's about an extra 2-mile round journey along a really busy road and that really tricky junction at the top of Huntingdon Road. So I think it would be absolutely transformative if we could have the cycle route and the pedestrian route put in as quickly as possible and the gate opens. The reasons that the developers have given for not wanting to do this are all reasons which have been avoided through the second cycle route, which goes around the back of Darwin Green and comes out further down Histon Roads, around construction around it. So I think it should not be beyond the wit of humanity to open up a cycle route. So I would really support this. And what I might suggest, Chair, if the rest of the committee and yourself are willing, is that perhaps as an area committee we could write to the developers to urge them to consider doing this as soon as possible. And I think, and I'm sure this is what Councillor Smith is also about to talk about, that this planning application will come to JDCC at some point in the future. And if it's appropriate for our area committee to raise a point, perhaps in writing to the JDCC when it comes there, to stress the need for this and our support for it, I would also really appreciate that if colleagues are willing to support it.
Yep, that sounds like a very reasonable proposal. Thanks. Councillor Smith.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So there are a number of questions there. And thank you very much for raising these issues on behalf of the Darwin Green community. Just in relation to the community rooms, the council has been in negotiation with Barratt's David Wilson Homes now for approaching 12 months. My understanding is there are multiple problems with the building, but they are now reaching the end of their negotiations with a view to completion of the agreement. Now, I hesitate to say when this building will be open, because it was this time last year I was reliably informed it would have been opened in February this year. Now it's more likely to be February 2023, but don't hold me to that. There's obviously a great deal of uncertainty, and I know that the doing legals with Barratt's David Wilson Homes can be very protracted. Let me just now turn to the health centre. As you will know, there were Section 106 agreements for Eddington and for Darwin Green, and both included provision for a health centre and contributions to the first few years' rental costs. The new integrated health system has put on hold all changes to accommodation across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, pending a review of future accommodation requirements. But I'm very pleased to say that an exception has been made for Darwin Green. And the reason for that is that obviously it's a very fast growing population in Eddington and Darwin Green, but the patient list at 1 Huntingdon Road, which, as you'll know, serves most of us in our area, has been growing at a very, very high rate indeed, and is pretty much running at capacity. So the health system is bringing forward invitations from private sector and other GP practices to express interest in operating the health centre. There's nothing coming from the private operators like Virgin and people like that, then it'll be open to the local GP practices. But I think one thing isn't yet clear is what other ancillary related health services they will have within the building. It will take a few months to sort that out. In parallel, the NHS property people team are working with Barratt's David Wilson Homes on preparation of a lease. I hope that doesn't take as long as it's taken the council to sort out, although I have made them aware of the problems with the building. And then after that, there will be a 12-month fitting out period. So again, don't hold me to this, but if everything goes smoothly, there is the possibility of the health centre opening in, say, mid-2024, something like that. So progress has been made on those two vital elements of the community social infrastructure and services for the new community. I have heard from Barratt's David Wilson Homes that they are in negotiations with the supermarket operator. But they're not really prepared to disclose who that is at this point. So if I just now turn to, I think you also mentioned about the lighting on the orbital cycleway. I think we all share that concern. This is an important route, and we've got a growing community there that wants to use it. So I've asked for advice from the planning service on this, and I've received the following. The route was approved under the Infrastructure Reserve Matters consent. The details of the lighting scheme were secured under a condition in the outline consent, but this is the problem, that condition and the Section 106 agreement do not include an installation trigger point. So what's happening over the infrastructure is that after the 200th house of dwelling has been occupied, that triggers some play area, so on and so forth, and 400, 600, 800, it goes like that. So I've asked the planning service to raise the matter with the developer with a view to bringing forward lighting along that route. I understand that at the recent community forum, they indicated that they were going to do some installations, but I'm now asking for confirmation of the scope and extent of that work. So just to turn to the point about you've raised on Windsor Road and the route through to Windsor Road. One part of that route is going to be considered as a Reserve Matters planning application at the Joint Development Control Committee, which I chair, on the 15th of February, and that's the Barratt's David Wilson Homes bundle number 3. Now, as you know, as you were present at the Northwest Community Forum, you raised that question, and Chris Fry, on behalf of Barratt's, gave you an answer, and it wasn't a very positive or constructive one, was it? And so, and I have to say that one of the problems with it that they face, and I'm just saying this because of course, you know, we all want to see that route opened up, but the actuality is that they will be constructing development on that site. And if you've seen the 25 or 30 large earth-moving bits of kit on BDW2, you would appreciate that's not the sort of space you want to have members of the public walking through. So they've got a corporate social responsibility to secure the safety of the public, and of course they'll take that very, very seriously. So it's a point we can keep pressing on, but I think we have to be realistic about the safety issues.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Lillian,
I
would you like to
answer?
respond? Yeah.
Yes. I've heard those words now for at least 6 years, coming back every year. Nothing is happening. The community rooms cannot open because they built the house so that there are flats on top of it, and they cannot allow any noises in the community rooms. So it isn't suitable for having meetings or any parties or anything what they were intended for. They will not open before April next spring. The same thing is with the library. It's the same thing. Young people will come to the library, but the noise conditions are under consideration, and they will not open that either until about at earliest next year. Sainsbury's were intended for being the supermarket. It's now in Eddington. There are no proposals for that. And we have had all these, exactly what you're saying now, patient, and we should be patient. I moved in there in 2006, and I have lived with Darwin Green since all the constructions. And 2018 was the worst part when they took all the green away from it. And it was like an Egyptian sandstorm coming in all this summer of 2018. People couldn't even open their windows in the area from the Histon roadside. No, I'm very strong on this one. No excuses anymore. The planning there is planning permission already, and they will start on the far away side rather than Windsor Road side. They could change if they wanted to. And I'm sorry I sound so harsh about this, but it has been a very long discussion, and all the officers are much, much aware of this. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Would anyone like to respond to that?
Well, I'm not going to be an apologist for Barratt's David Wilson homes, but they are a private sector company that make their own business decisions, and like that or not, that's the actual reality. Their plan is to start construction. Well, they've started construction of BDW2 and at BDW 5 and 6. So they're going to be developing from both ends of the site, and there is a phasing plan.
Yes, I know the phasing plan. We had it on maps. I can send them to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but we're talking about the temporary.
Yeah. Well, yes. So what we've got is so this is their plan, but they are very, very confident about the strength of the market for these 200 houses a year. But we'll just have to wait and see what the impact of the higher interest rates and recession is on that particular market. So it can't, the phasing plan cannot be predicted to be delivered as per their ambitions. Let's put it like that. But we certainly, as Councillor Payne said, we'll certainly raise your point again, because I think it is an important one. And I think it will be a great benefit to the community, as you've outlined. So we'll give it a go and see what happens.
Okay, thank you both. I trust that you'll still be in contact beyond this committee, so I'll leave it for you to continue this discussion.
Yes, thank you. If you can't get it one angle, you have to choose your focus, and you change your focus, and it will be going on. We will keep on.
Great. Okay.
Thank
Claire,
you.
Can I thank you very much?
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just check that we've had no further questions, Claire?
No further questions, Chair.
Fantastic. All right. Councillor Payne.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to clarify the action on Lillian's question. So just if the committee are happy to support us writing to BDW Homes and maybe to the JDCC, then perhaps Lillian, Councillor Smith and I can take that away to draft a letter to circulate via the members of this committee. Would that be a helpful way forwards?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Is everyone, I can't see everyone on my screen, but I'm assuming that everyone's happy to do that. Councillor Porritt?
Just to confirm that myself and Councillor Smith are sitting on JDCC normally, so I think we may just need to check who needs to put forward that letter. It may need to come perhaps for ward councillors who aren't on that committee. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you for all the help we can get.
Fantastic. All right, would anyone, I know we've been going for an hour and a half, would anyone like a break before our final agenda item, or are we happy to kind of power through? Okay, I'm going to take that as we're happy to keep going. Okay, so we're moving on to agenda item 8, which is the Environmental Improvement Programme for 2022-23. We're joined by John Richards and James Ogle, who are the project officers from the council, who are going to present this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. For those that don't know me, my name's John Richards, and I'm team leader within the Streets and Open Spaces team of Environment Services, and I've got overall lead officer responsibility for the development and delivery of environmental improvements. So to give you a bit of background to environmental improvements, this is a programme that's been running certainly in my 8 years with the council, and I think was initiated some time before that. But it's about making meaningful improvements to the environment of streets and open spaces across Cambridge. We've been delivering a fairly heavy programme, certainly over the last 10 years or so. There have been periodic adaptations made to the way the programme is developed and administered during that time. Most recently, last year in 2021, we undertook a review of how the City Council delivers environmental improvements, and we benchmarked it against a number of other authorities across the country. And the findings from that were that we're doing pretty well, actually, in terms of the way we do it, and there's a lot of consistency there across the country. One of the findings was that we could potentially look to engage more directly with members of the public and communities in bringing the schemes forward, or inviting the scheme suggestions in the first place. So what we've moved to do this time is to use the new portal that the council is or has adopted, and we're one of the sort of the early testers of it with environmental improvement. So the new Citizens Lab portal enables much better direct engagement with members of the public on sort of policy items and even detailed schemes. So we've made the most of that opportunity with the request for another round of submissions for environmental improvements for this financial year. So we went out to sort of invitation towards the end of September, and we had a sort of an application window running up towards the end of October. We've received the best part of 100 odd suggestions coming forward, split across the 4 geographic areas of Cambridge, and also in 2019, this is actually referenced in the report tabled before you, but in 2019, following a further review, we developed the split of environmental improvement funding, which was partly towards local area schemes, split across the 4 areas by proportion to local population, but also a block of funding that's kept to be developed and delivered centrally on themes that the council considers to be particularly important. So in terms of according with current policy objectives and those sorts of things. So we made that split in 2019. We're still delivering on that programme of schemes that were last invited in, going back to 2019-20 now. We last ran invitation round. And the team have had to pause delivery for some time from 2020 through to early 2022 as a result of the impacts of the pandemic and the resourcing impacts that brought. But we are getting up to speed again now with it. And consequently, we felt it appropriate to invite another round of applications, which have now come forward. And we're in the process now, Chair, of going around the various area committees and seeking comments from area committees on those suggestions that have come forward for further consideration by the Executive Councillor for Open Spaces and Food Justice and Community Development. So that's effectively the process. In terms of West Central area, your allocation for the current year is a little over £20,000 in terms of your share of the overall £100,000 that's available across Cambridge. You've had around 20 schemes put forward. So officers have undertaken an initial assessment of these suggestions that have come forward. And we've put those before you tonight for further consideration. We have, and this has become fairly standardised practice over the last few years. We've tried to give an indication to councillors in terms of those suggestions that come forward, in terms of fit for programme eligibility, fit for alignment with corporate objectives, but also a bit of an indication as to how complicated we foresee that the development and delivery of these projects might be, just very mindful of the resources that we have going forward and that we are still recovering a bit of a backlog in delivery from previous years' programmes. So whilst wanting obviously to have a forward programme of work that we can move on to, there is a need to manage expectations to some degree. So we've tried to focus very much on those projects that we think will be fairly straightforward to take forward. And the good news really for West Central is that those projects that we've assessed thus far, and as I say, this is just a very sort of desk-based assessment. Those that we've assessed so far are affordable within the budget allocation that you've got for the current year. So if members are minded to support those, I think the task that I would like you to focus your attentions on this evening are then whether there are other schemes perhaps that we have indicated might be in the green amber list. So there's 4 or 5 of those, and which of those might be your priorities if we have sufficient money or funding in the current year to move to those. It's worth also being aware that if for instance some area committees do not recommend taking forward the full allocation that they have, so for instance if some areas haven't got sufficient schemes to meet the full budget that they have available, there is potentially an opportunity to look at reallocating or redirecting funding around the areas. So we are encouraging all committees also not just to think about the individual sort of share that you've got at the moment, but also a number of reserve projects that we might move to if further funding is available that's that's not needed for other areas. The other thing that I would, we have actually just today actually sent out a couple of extra tables that hopefully will be helpful to you, that set these projects out in an order of their scheme number, but also their ranking, their RAG ranking or rating. And members will see that there are a number of projects there that have come through the local area submissions, but that we think will be eligible for the strategic funding block. So that's funded out of the centralised citywide pot. So there are a few of those across all of the areas, including in West Central. So those don't or won't need potentially to be funded from your local area monies of just over £20,000. So I think, Chair, at that stage, I've probably done enough by way of introduction, and I'd very much welcome any questions or comments that members have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, John. We can start with a question from Councillor Porritt.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, John and James, for all your work on putting this together, and particularly for the revised RAG rating with the green at the top. That's really helpful. I mean, I think broadly I'm very supportive of the green ones. I did have one suggestion, because at the moment we've not managed to cover that many bids. Understandably, we never get a huge amount of money in our ward. So I should apologise to Councillor Holloway. I did wonder, in the interest of equity, there's one bid that covers 3 wards, that's 4.5k, the notice boards, which are still obviously really important, but I did wonder how members would feel perhaps about putting that one a little bit lower down, and then that would allow each ward sort of one more bid that they could get in. I mean, for example, in Market Ward, guessing that's probably what Councillor Bix put his hand up for. We've got one that will attract match funding if we can get it through this year, for example. And I mean, I don't know about other wards, but the other question I had for the officers was, I'm pretty sure when I was Open Spaces Spokes, which was last year, we do have money in the Streets and Open Spaces budgets for some of the kind of tree and planting stuff. So I did wonder if some of the ones that are currently amber or amber green that aren't covered, so there's the hedgerows on Midsummer Common, I think Fen Causeway, Barton Road, is that something we could fund from some of our existing pots? And finally, I think we've got one in Newtown in Market Ward, which I know the chair knows is an important part of our ward. But we've also got one in the strategic one that says street trees in Market. So, for example, could the Norwich one, although it's probably bushes rather than trees, could they, for example, be merged into that bid? Because to me, the kind of street trees in Market covers what Norwich Street are asking for, which I appreciate may not be trees, but I know when we say trees, we mean green. It doesn't always have to be an actual tree. So I'd welcome some views on that. And I mean, obviously, I'll let other ward councillors speak to which bids are important to them, but certainly I know the one in Market with match funding would be one we'd be keen to get through this year. So, but apologies to Councillor Holloway. It's not that your bid isn't great. I was just trying to find a way that made it equitable across wards, so we weren't all fighting for each other's money. That just seemed one that would be a fair distribution. But obviously, I'll see what you all think.
Thank you, Councillor Porritt. James or John, would you like to take those few questions to start with, and then I'll come back to further questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I should have apologised. I should have introduced my colleague James Ogle, who's done a lot of the legwork on this and should take a lot of the credit, I think, for all the hard work that he's done. So apologies for that, for those of you that don't know James. Yeah, I think those councillor very helpful suggestions. I think in the one that I perhaps focus on primarily is the one around sort of additional funding streams that might be available to sort of help bolster this particular programme. And I think, you know, we try to use EIP creatively and constructively to fill gaps in other funding streams, and we've done that successfully over a number of years, particularly around local highways improvements, working with the county council. You know, and for instance, in some areas we have had requests for play equipment and those sorts of things, which we feel is more appropriately funded through Section 106 monies. And we are actually working with the Urban Growth Manager at the moment about a potential future application round for Section 106 requests, which hopefully will be good news to councillors. But yeah, we can certainly try to do that. In terms of the street canopy project, that is actually concluding now. So the EU funded programme is actually fully committed and just winding up. So I don't think there's sort of potential for additional funding there. However, having said that, we do have a capital budget for street trees, which the team are supporting our arboricultural team on the delivery for. So that's a £200,000 capital programme item spread over 4 years. And I think the first year has been committed and largely delivered now. What the team are looking at doing is really trying to do some spatial mapping to inform the investment strategy for the remaining funding there, and look at where there are gaps and where there are streets, for instance, that are really short of trees and short of not just within the streetscape, but within the private realm as well. So, you know, people's back gardens and front gardens and those sorts of things, and where street trees could really make a really marked difference, particularly with things like air quality and biodiversity, and also you know, absorbing peak rainfall. So we're trying to take an informed approach to it, and the team are supporting the arboricultural team on that. And yes, if there are opportunities to sort of move money around, we'll certainly look to try and do that. And I think the good thing that we've always tried to do with environmental improvements is that if there are savings and if things can be delivered in different ways, then effectively that money becomes available for allocation to other projects that might come forward. So we've always sort of run it as a bit of a rolling programme, although carrying forward funds from one year to the next, of course, is becoming increasingly difficult as council funding pressures become ever greater. Does that help? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have Councillor Nessinger next.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the work that you've done on this, John and James. It's a good list. I wanted to talk about, in particular, I'm very keen that we try and squeeze the tree protection at the end of Skaters Meadow into the programme. I know it's marked amber because of the uncertainty about the land use, and I think I know a lot about the uncertainty about the land use. But I think that is a one of these bids which I would be extremely keen to see go forward. I'd also be keen to see it be use of large deadwood trees, trunks and branches rather than telegraph poles, actually, for the biodiversity advantages that would bring. So if that's at all possible, that would be great. But I would be very sorry to see that drop off the list because it doesn't come under the for me, that's a more important project than some of the other ones which are marked green. So if we could prioritise that one, I would be very grateful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councillor Nessinger. I'm going to take another couple of questions if that's all right. So Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to talk about the project, which is about the provision of places for unsightly bins on Christ Pieces. I think it would be a pity from the council's point of view if we didn't find a way of including this bid. It's one that I've been working on for quite a long time with officers and with businesses on King Street. The problem is that this is active negative that we can address, unlike some of the other things which are perfectly reasonably are trying to increase the positives. This is something that is really a very active negative. It's both an eyesore on the corner of our green flag open space and Christ Pieces, and a negative view specified in the conservation area plan. And the problem is that the commercial bins associated with businesses on King Street have simply nowhere to go because the plots that the businesses occupy are all building. They're long-standing businesses, so they've existed since before the days that everyone needed to provide their own space for their own refuse. And this project is one that is about match funding. So it's not, it wouldn't be a great idea not to get the money from the businesses that this would unlock. And I just think that as officers have examined this, both from the Waste Service and the Urban Design team and the Open Spaces team, and all are saying that this is achievable. And in the negotiation with the with the central business to this, who is an architect, that we have the offer of him designing the solution, which actually takes some of the pressure from the City Council, obviously subject to our officer's approval. But I just think it's one of those things which is an opportunity, and if we don't capitalise on it when everything has been put in place, then we're going to allow a long-standing negative to continue, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Bick, for your contribution. I don't know, John and James, whether it's helpful for us to kind of give our pieces or whether you're expecting to respond to all of this, because I know that this is kind of a chance for you just to hear what we have to say. But if you'd like to respond to any of that now, then please do.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will, if I may. Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the benefits really of coming along and speaking to you about these things, because I've learned more about these aspirations tonight than I previously knew. So you know, some of those assessments that we've provided for you have not necessarily been aware of that information. So that's certainly helpful. And I think, you know, we're not making recommendations to you tonight. We're deliberately not wanting to do that because we want you to really be the conduit for the needs across your area and be the you know, those really shaping and influencing those projects that are able to go forward from local area funds. And you know, I think there, of the 20 or so applications that we've had, most of them are deliverable in some shape or form, albeit that they might need a bit of tweaking. But you know, you can't afford to do all of them this year. So really it's a question of which of those you consider are going to be the priorities, but recognizing that some of those, if they are more complicated and they are going to take more time to develop or more resource to bring forward, they might not be, you know, developed and implemented within the first 6 months of the programme. They might take a year or possibly more to bring forward. So I think it's just really trying to get a bit of a sort of a sort of practical understanding of that. In terms of the Skaters Meadow suggestion, yeah, I mean, I think that this is something as well that County Highways have got input to, and we have been liaising with them on that. That there is a much bigger aspiration there, which I'm sure Councillor Nessinger is fully aware of, which is about a better management regime for that whole area, which is used as a sort of a local car park as well as an access through route between Grantchester and Grantchester Meadows and access to the riverbank. But this element of it appears to be a sort of a much sort of smaller scoped element of it, just in terms of providing protection to a sort of a tree line or vegetation line that's there at the moment. So I think that one has got potential. As I say, the dependencies around that really are the sort of the agreements that we will need from other stakeholders. And Councillor Bick, in terms of the Christ Pieces bins, I certainly wasn't aware that much background work had been invested in it already. So if the scheme is viable and deliverable and all it needs is, you know, is an element of funding injection, then, you know, I fully understand your view that it should perhaps be a local area priority, and you know, I would fully support that if you would like to make it so. So Chair, I think does that respond to the points currently and help members?
Great, yeah, that's really helpful.
I don't know if James has got anything more that he might want to add, because I think he has been, and we've used Citizens Lab this time, and one of the tools or functions that's been able to provide us is this sort of thumbs up, thumbs down flag. And I think James has been able to interrogate some of that data that we've had in, so it might be better positioned than me to respond to sort of detailed questions about individual projects. So I may well bring him in if that helps.
Yeah, James?
I don't think I have really anything else to add. The only reason, one of the main reasons that Skaters Meadow came out as an amber was kind of uncertainty about ownership and how we'd be able to implement anything on land which we don't have any permission to do so. And it was that kind of uncertainty as well. But yeah, I take your point about using dead wood instead of telegraph poles. That would, you know, much more positive. and I can understand why you'd want to move it up a little bit, and also move community notice boards potentially lower down and maybe do that in future. I don't know how much of a push there is for that, and I can see that and Councillor Holloway's got his hand up. I don't know if he's going to defend that one. I want to bring it, or want to, want that to definitely go through. I don't know.
All right, thank you. Councillor Payne, and then we'll come to Councillor Holloway.
I'm happy to go to Councillor Holloway first, Chair, if that's helpful for sort of. So obviously we're not deciding on the items ourselves, but I think us having a framework to present to John and James of how we'd like to see them happen might be useful. So I don't know if Councillor Holloway wants to go in about the notice boards before we go any further.
Yeah, was your comment about them? Go for it.
Yeah. I just well, firstly, it's not just a Newnham project. This is a project for all wards. So I would like to defend it because I think it is important for community engagement. The reason I put this forward is that I think at the moment, sometimes it can be difficult to consult with residents on issues. Sometimes residents aren't aware of certain issues. And this is a way of going to residents rather than them having to actively go onto the City Council website, for example. Not everyone is spending all their time on that website, I suspect. And even if they are, then they're not necessarily going to see every consultation, or it's not just about consultations, it might be about things that are happening in a particular area. And I think it's a really positive way of engaging with people who aren't necessarily engaging with other council issues or engaging in the ways that are already available. And I know that a lot of residents in Newnham do say, oh, I saw this on a notice board, or I saw this notice that was put up for a planning application, but less frequently would they say, oh, I saw that this was put up on the citizen engagement platform. So the reason I think it's useful is that it helps us to engage with residents, and it helps residents to engage with other residents. It depends, I suppose, what our priorities for the schemes are. So obviously environment is a very broad remit. This is more about engagement and about democracy. The other projects are more about environment in the sense of trees and biodiversity and reduction of carbon emissions and a lot of other positive stuff. So I think maybe we would just have to decide what our priorities are for these schemes. But I like this project and I would like to see it stay if possible. I do have one other question, actually, not to, well, it is sort of to try and kick out other projects, but it's not really that. I just wonder on the Midsummer Common paths, I mean, that is a big issue, definitely. My question is whether £3,000 is enough to tackle the issue sufficiently, and whether an LHI bid would work better in that regard. Partly a question for Councillor Bick and partly for the officers.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holloway. Does anyone want to respond to that? Councillor Bick?
Well, I can respond to that, but my role in this has been in channeling something forward from the Friends of Midsummer Common. The amount of money put on the bid is one that was proposed by Alistair Wilson, having looked at it and talked to us about it. And I think the reason why we would foresee this as an EIP bid is that it isn't really addressing highways, even though the county council is a partner in the cycleway. But I think it's something that I mean, I've given a few examples of things that could be piloted, and Alistair felt that £3,000 was enough to do that. And I think this is something that, whereas Friends of Midsummer Common have come forward and suggested this, that it's something that actually, by being a pilot, can have much wider application to other open spaces in all wards across the city, but particularly in Midsummer Common, where the use of the common to journeys across the river by active transport, and the fact that it is a national cycle route, I think make it a good place to have an experiment.
Great, thank you. James or John, would you like to respond at all?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah,
I can do a little bit, John, if that's okay. I mean,
yeah, okay.
regarding the shared use paths, I think we were looking to some ideas around signage and sort of things on the footpath, and so the cost wouldn't potentially be that high, and it may start to get people think, oh, it's a shared use pathway rather than I'm just going to bomb down here on my bike and knock into pedestrians. I think that was the idea. A little bit on notice boards. I mean, it's a good project, no doubt about it, and it is more about engagement and democracy probably. However, you know, they are a bit difficult to find a site that people agree with in the area, and one that's, you know, visible, and it's whether you'd be able to get one in each ward, which would be, you know, walk past and used. And the other issue is, you know, getting highways approvals and also maintaining it. So usually you need a group, either resident association, to actually update the information. And if I don't know if each area has that, and if they've got a location in mind. That's the only thing I would put forward, you know, regarding WC9, which is the community notice boards. I don't want to throw it out, but I'm just saying that that can be a bit of a challenge for the officer. If you've got no one to maintain it, then it's just going to be a notice board with out-of-date information. Is that okay, John? Do you want to come into anything else?
Nothing to add, James or Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to go on to Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. I realise it's tricky, as obviously we all want to defend bids in our wards. So I think it would be great if we could find a consensus of, and maybe this perhaps is something that James and John could come back with possibly, of like how we could phase it to achieve as much of this as possible, if that's split over a few different years, or if there are other sources of funding which other bids could come from. As at the community notice boards, I think are a lovely idea, but I sort of interpreted this pot of funding to be around improving the environment. So the bid I place is for wildflower planting along Woodlark, Eschard, Hoadley and Sherlock roads, which has a huge gain for biodiversity and pollinators in the area. So I think this was a great idea. I'm not trying to knock them off the list, but if there was somewhere else they could come from that perhaps isn't a sort of an environment project, but maybe it's a community project, there might be other pots of funding, such as the community bids that come to council. So I wonder if that's something we could come back with. I just want to talk about the one in Castle Ward, which I first spoke to John about absolutely years and years ago. It was a very long time, of wildflower planting, and just really urge people's support in this. So we have a huge problem on the area where Councillor Smith lives, called the Square, with verge parking, particularly with a number of houses that have had renovations or extensions recently. And since the residents' parking scheme with double yellow lines was introduced, a number of, particularly those big heavy lorries coming to do renovations, do pull up onto the curb, and they've churned up the grass verge at the side of the road, making it really, really quite muddy and unpleasant, particularly at the moment. And I've also, one of the reasons I submitted this bid was residents were coming forward saying that they actually struggle to sometimes get into their homes or onto their drives because where people have parked. And so I think some form of planting would be a really simple, easy way to prevent that. I know that Councillor Smith and I have both done sort of consultations on this with residents, and we've both found strong favour in terms of wildflowers. I think mine came out like 73% in favour to 20% against. So I think there is a wish for it. But I think what it does require, and this is why it might take a bit longer to deliver, is a bit of sensitive consultation around it, as there are some areas where the verge is very narrow, or where it's the only space for people to put their bins. So I think we'd be interested in bringing this bid forward more as a sort of pocket planting kind of scheme. So perhaps wouldn't be wildflowers all the way along every single verge, but there might be pockets in places agreed with residents. I know some residents are quite interested in bits of shrubs, particularly on areas of grass where perhaps need a bit more defence on the corners against the vehicle parking. And some residents would simply like to have the green area outside their house reseeded because it's become so churned up. So I think there is a great deal we could do to really kind of regenerate those verges so that they hopefully look lovely throughout the year and they add to biodiversity, whether that be through grass, shrubs, or through wildflowers or bulbs. So I'd be really interested, even if it takes a bit longer to deliver that one, to look at consulting on it carefully so we can do it and get it right. So it adds hopefully a great benefit to that area. So I'd really encourage people to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. I'm going to come to Councillor Smith in case you have a response or anything to add to that in Castle.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for that. I'll just go through some of the comments that have been made. I thought that the community notice board project was actually a very good idea. It was the one I found actually most attractive of the lot, and it is one for each ward. So that's one that you don't have to argue about geographical distribution of monies. So for and I do agree with Councillor Holloway's comments on how useful these notice boards can be. Just linking back then to this question of what's the additionality within this programme? Why can't these projects be put into the mainstream programmes for the capital budgets and all the rest of it? And I find that this is a over-engineered, highly resource-intensive process that we're being put through, and it's not really in line with what we want aspirations for being a modern council, where we streamline all our activities in the context of having to find £11 million savings from our general fund over the next 5 years. So I do question the whole basis of this programme. Nevertheless, for this year we are where we are, so let's deal with it. The one for Lammas Land, that's WC14. I noted that there was a Lammas Land Management Plan. Why can't that be incorporated in that plan? The Midsummer Common Path is a difficult one. I cycle on this path frequently, and I've been considering this over the last few days. The thing is that it's a park, and it's not, in a sense, it's necessarily a route through. A lot of people walk across it and they're relaxed. They're not as if they're traveling. It's a process of leisure and recreation that they're going through, and they walk across this path randomly, and some with dogs and little children. And so for a cyclist, you are forced to slow down in order to make sure you don't knock into anybody. And in any event, if you get close, you can just go onto the grass and get out the way of people. So I'm not sure that regulating channeling routes along this path the way it is would actually be successful. So I do question that. I think it would need a safety audit before it could go ahead in my view on that one. I also think that doing works on unregulated land, unregistered land. I think this has there were certain rules around this scheme that so if it's not public land, then you've got to have the permission of the landowner and so on. So I find that one problematic. I'll just turn to the square, as Councillor Payne has just made the case for it. I have done that sensitive level consultation, and out of the 135 dwellings, 49 people were positive about the proposition, and what they were actually quite interested in was something as a mixture of the wildflowers, bulbs, shrubs, and so on. But of course, it would create a hodgepodge along the verges, because there were 34 households that were opposed. They just want to keep the grass verges. And there's 52 people didn't actually reply at all, answer the door, the number of times I've called on them. So that would have to be repeated if this was approved. But I do think that it would certainly, it would enhance the appearance of the square, and I think it would engage people in thinking about the ecology and the biodiversity of the area. So my wife has said that she doesn't want anything to happen to her verge, and she's the decision taker on these matters. So I can't express, although I'm a resident, I can't express an interest in whether this scheme goes ahead or not, because my wife's made the decision. So that's all I have to say on these. Oh yes, I was going to say I support what Councillor Pora was saying about the Norwich Street fitting in with the citywide strategic bid. I think that was a good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. So, James or John, would you like to respond to any of those points? Or yeah, John.
Yeah, shall I? Thank you, Chair. Shall I lead? I think in terms of the Woodlark Estate issue that we seem to have there, in terms of parking being the sort of the pressure that's leading to these problems developing, I think my question for Councillors Payne and Smith would really be whether you think this is local parking needs, or whether it's further afield parking needs, commuter parking and those sorts of things. And my reason for asking that is that where we've taken these sort of ideas forward elsewhere, if you have split local opinion within a street about the purpose of the verge or the role of the verge and its function, whether it's a parking asset or whether it's an environmental amenity, quite often you find that there's a split view, because particularly in areas where you've got multi-occupancy and you have got parking pressures either on street or off street, because there just isn't enough capacity to accommodate the vehicles that local residents have. So I think I'd be interested to understand a little bit more about that. And actually, I think our chances of success here in being able to implement something that would stick and would be observed by people would be if it has a real groundswell of local support. So it's encouraging to hear that there does seem to be that. On the paths, Midsummer Common paths query, Chair, would you mind if I just share my screen, because hopefully I can show you an image, which is something that colleagues at the County Council have adopted as a form of marking on the access way path alongside the Cambridgeshire Guided Busway. Now the ones there are starting to wear through. This is a thermoplastic marking which is heat applied to the path surfacing. It's quite discreet. It's about 400 millimeters wide, but you do definitely notice them, and it's just really trying to encourage sort of positive behaviour amongst all users of the open space. So I think as a sort of recognising Councillor Bick's suggestion that we approach this sort of cautiously and very much on a sort of a pilot style basis initially, at least, this was the sort of thing that we thought we'd like to try within the budget allocation that we've estimated. So I think we felt that it's a large open space there, but we could have these at certainly the potentially the entry points to the open space, and also where paths cross, and at sort of periodic intervals in between, where there are sort of long sort of lengths of path in between, just as reminders to people. So that hopefully provides a bit more of a sort of a flavour of what we think might be appropriate there. In terms of Councillor Smith's question about the Lammers Land Management Plan, yes, indeed, I think our first check on this was to see whether there was anything in the management plan that might preclude this particular suggestion that has come forward, but there doesn't seem to be. And I think similar to the Christ Pieces bin question, it may just be a question of unlocking some funding, which is why we're thinking why this particular suggestion has come forward. But James may be able to help with some further sort of detail on that, perhaps.
Actually, part of the management plan for Lammasland.
Right. Is there a reason why it hasn't come forward thus far? Do you think, James? Is it purely a funding issue?
Yeah.
But this.
So obviously they've just bid for an EIP to do an element of the management plan to deliver. So, seems to be the case. Yeah.
Nothing further from me, Chair, unless there's further question on that.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to make everyone aware that we only have 10 minutes left of the meeting. So I'm going to come to Simon. I'm assuming that's a legacy hand.
No.
Okay. So
I
can
just
everyone keep the questions and comments quite brief? So I'm going to go to Councillor Nessinger first.
Thank you. So I'm going to say slightly more than I had intended to, following on from what Simon had to say. I think that one of the key points about the EIP programme is that it's a place where residents are able to bring projects forward rather than them being produced by the council. And I think that's incredibly important. And it brings me on to the point about some of the other projects versus Cameron's notice boards. I think it would be slightly not necessarily ideal for us to turn down projects that have been brought to us by residents in order to put up things that residents haven't asked for and which are for us to communicate with residents. Surely the best way to treat them is to do the things that they ask for. So my suggestion would be that we that in terms of priority, I would still like to prioritise the Newnham Skaters Meadow one above the notice boards. I'd actually quite like to prioritise it above the Lammasland one as well. So if finance is an issue, then I would like to press ahead to just reconfirm that would be my strong preference, that should be the priority scheme for Newnham, because it's one that residents have been talking about for some time. It is, I think, from your introduction, John, you implied that there might be ways in which this budget could be stretched, but I'm also aware that one of the limits on this budget is not only the money but the staff time and capacity to develop these projects. So if it's possible to make it clear that is one that I think it should be a priority and that some of the other ones are lower down, that would be really helpful. And I do think that one of the key points about this programme is that it is resident driven. As councillors, we have a number of other ways of taking things forward within the council through the budget process, etc. Residents, this is their way of doing it, and I think it's important that we are respectful of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nessinger. I'm going to go next to, sorry, I've lost the list. Councillor Porrer.
Thanks. I'll be as quick as I can, Chair. Yeah, I think the Midsummer Common one is something that just has come up for residents across all these three wards consistently, the issue of the shared paths. And I think, as Councillor Bick said, I would really support that if we can do for £3,000, get these signs in trial, then we hope that would help Newnham and Castle in the future as well. Because again, as Councillor Nessinger says, it's about what residents have said, and that is what we've seen every single time we've had West Central that comes up. So I would really support the Midsummer Common one. Also, again, the bins, because of the match funding, that seems like a really obvious one. And I think the other thing I would just say is the Norwich Street bid. I would really, really like to echo what Councillor Smith said, that could that be please referred back as a priority for the street trees project, noting that it may not be a tree, it may be a bush or a hedge, but because I think there are some highway works potentially involved with that officers have highlighted. And I do think if we've got that bigger pot, by the looks of it, the strategic funding, it seems sensible that might be one I'd like to ask if officers could prioritise for that, please. If Councillor Gilder and Councillor Bick support that as ward councillors, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porrer. I'd just like to echo on, sorry, I realise I haven't said anything on this, but I think personally I'm keen for the Norfolk Street trees as well. It's a local issue that many residents have raised in those areas, that the The traffic control, whatever they're called, the boxes that were
Yeah.
put in temporarily, they'd like for those to be replaced with trees if possible, instead of with the metal poles. So whether that could be kind of put as a priority in another area, or whether this could be kind of made aware of, then that would be really, really great. So I'd just like to echo that. All right, we're going to go very, very quickly to Councillor Smith and then Councillor Holloway, and then I'll let James and John kind of wrap up if that's all right.
Okay, right. Well, the first thing, just answering your question about parking on the square, there is a residence parking scheme, and residents do not park on the verges. It's the delivery vehicles to building sites that are the main culprits, or just delivery vehicles. At the moment, the situation isn't as bad as it has been. So so I hope that answers your question. I don't know whether fellow councillors would now want to reach a point of trying to organise agreement, consensus on these schemes. I would like to see a balance between all three wards. So if I may, I'd like to see for Castle the notice board in the burial ground, which got more positive thumbs than any other one in terms of net terms, and a 3,500 allocation for the square, because we've got fewer people involved in it than was originally envisaged. For Market, the Christ bins and the Midsummer Common Path, with Norwich Street as a reserve, and with it being referred back to the strategic citywide project. And for Newnham, the Gothway bins, the bench, Skaters Meadow, and then that would leave enough money for the community boards. So if you've noted that you digest that whilst Cameron has a word, and let's see where that gets us to.
Thank you, Simon. Great, let's move to Cameron.
All right, very briefly, the bottom two, which are the plant bulbs and wildflowers on Fen Causeway roundabout and the wildflower planting on Barton Road. I don't want to throw a spanner in the works too much, but there has been an offer by some residents of supporting those, so that might reduce the cost a bit on those. But I recognise that they are lower priority than some of the others, but equally would be nice schemes. And yeah, there's some support available. Take the point on the community notice boards being something that I've put forward. Equally, it is in response to residents saying that they want more communication and easier ways of communicating. So it's I think it's a tricky one. Not the time for debate now because we've got 5 minutes, but thank you, and I accept that point.
Thank you so much. All right, so I hope that's kind of given you a steer, and Councillor Bick, I'm going to give you literally 30 seconds. Go for it. No?
Sorry, I used up most of that in getting on the screen. I just wanted to say that I think that we're just listening to a series of assertions here, that we haven't got the power to make decisions. It isn't really a very satisfactory process. I do think that this is a loose and advisory, and I'm not sure really how much we've added to it. So I'm a bit disappointed by the process, but I think we've all, as a consequence, acted rather kind of just pitching, and there's no solution to actually how we can reach a consensus, despite the fact that people have aggressively asserted that their view is the consensus, and that obviously isn't the case.
Okay, thank you. I know that Councillor Collis is watching and listening, and I know that John and James are very happy to take further comments and discuss this via email. James, I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, really. I mean, we can come back with a proposal and suggestion, and then if obviously we have, we're happy with it, or certain people are happy with it, we'll take their opinions obviously from the email, and then obviously take that to Councillor Collis and say this is what we think, and hopefully we can then make a decision from that. I mean, she's listened today, so she knows a lot of people are supporting for most of the projects. Actually, I don't think there's any that's not particularly supported at all. But yeah, so we'll come back with a list of what we believe can be funded from this, what can be potentially funded from the strategic, and what may be potentially as a reserve list, and what may sort of become unsuccessful in a way because it's maybe not being supported so strongly. So if you're happy for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be really appreciated, I think. And just like to echo what everyone else has said, that we're really grateful for your time this evening and for your ongoing support with all of this applications, and just encourage everyone to get in touch if they have any further questions or things that they'd like to raise regarding the EIPs. Okay, right, we have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a long one. We've had lots of important things to discuss. The next area committee is after Christmas, so we're going to be into March, on the 16th of March 2023, so please make sure you have that date in your diary. And Boris, we can terminate the stream link now.